Last night, the Minnesota Wild looked a little closer to their early season form in beating the Boston Bruins 4-2. We recap the game plus some tweaks on the power play and the penalty kill. A great game for Cam Talbot and Tyson Jost's debut. A whole bunch to discuss today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked on Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we recap the 4-2 win for the Wild over the Boston Bruins last night, a win that saw the Wild look a little closer to the team that started the season off so hot. We'll talk about Kirill Kaprizov continuing to climb the Wild's leaderboard in terms of points in a season, goals in a season, pretty much every category you can think of. So we'll talk about that. Plus the tweaks to the power play and the penalty kill. Did they work? Did they not? We'll debate that and more today. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked on Wild, veteran content producer covering all Minnesota sports teams over the last decade or so, and now focusing exclusively on the Minnesota Wild. And it felt good to get back into the win column last night, much like the New York Rangers game, a game that we looked back at when it happened and said, hey, here is a nice bounce back win. The team looked like the old Wild. And after that, it just kind of reverted back to the same form. So hopefully that doesn't happen this time. But for the Wild, a great game because I think the team kind of started to feel it after the Nico Sturm trade. Now, a lot of the reason for the Nico Sturm trade was getting something in return for him before he left via free agency, but at the same time, a little bit of a message sent to the team to the tune of, hey, pick up your performance or we'll be making more moves similar to this before the trade deadline. And so obviously trying to get back on track. And it looked a lot like what we saw in the early portion of the season. Some early goals to get the team off and running, a little bit of a push by the opponent, but then the Wilds tighten up and come away with the win. And there's really no better way to get a game started than by having Kirill Kaprizov score the first couple of goals. There were some stories. Michael Russo had, I think, the main one about Kaprizov getting upset and being frustrated by how the team had played as of late. And in those situations, you want to see your best players kind of step up and say, hey, we're not going to let this happen anymore. And Kaprizov did with the 2 goals. He continues to climb the leaderboard in terms of total points in a single season for the Minnesota Wild. On pace for 45 goals and 105 points, which would be, he would have the most goals in a single season record, which currently sits at 42. The most points in a season, he is rapidly getting close to that mark already. In fact, you look at what he has currently at 75 points. The all-time team record is 83. And so he's getting very close to that mark as well. So it shouldn't be too long. His just a monster season from Kirill Kaprizov. And so it was good to see him be the one to kind of set the tone early and say, hey, we need to take better care of our own business and get the win. And really help this team get off to a good start. And we saw all the elements that have kind of been missing at points throughout this skid. We saw some good goaltending from Cam Talbot. The 2 goals that were allowed, look at those kind of in a vacuum. The first goal that Boston scored was a shot from a deep part of the zone that hit off of Matt Dumba's skate and trickled in. Really nothing you can do about that if you're Cam Talbot. You're focused on the puck coming in, and it just takes a weird carom. I was critical at the time that goal happened because it looked like a bad rebound opportunity that just kicked out right to the Bruins in front of the net. But in actuality, it hits off of Dumba's stick, and if the Bruins don't see that, they don't even get the shot off. So it was just Craig Smith taking advantage of a shot from the top of the zone and just getting the perfect carom to be able to tap it in for that first goal. And then the second goal that the Bruins scored, on the power play, Brad Marchand, one of the best in the business, just kind of gets lost in the zone. He has a clean entry. The Wild are kind of stuck in between pulling back towards the net and a couple of players getting back into the zone. And so he just takes advantage. There's a screen in front of the net. And, that's just a good play and a good goal by that Bruins team. So Talbot had some great saves throughout the course of the night. And so, it's definitely a step in the right direction for him. And we want to see that. We want to see this get back on track. And so hopefully that will help Talbot's confidence to be able to do so. We then finished the game by seeing the GREEF line absolutely take over. Jordan Greenway scores his 6th of the season. And then Ryan Hartman pulls some empty net magic on the opposite end with an empty netter to seal the scoring. And so all in all, a great effort by the Wild. They had physicality. They had good defense. They had good goaltending. And so a great night for the Wild. I did want to, before we move on to some of the special teams changes, I did want to point to one thing in particular. Shout out to Brett Marshall for putting this together on Twitter. The Greenway, Eriksson Ek, Foligno line last night. 11 minutes, 22 seconds total time on ice together. They had 1 goal scored. That was Greenway's goal. Shots were 18-6 in favor of the Greenway line. 9-3 shots on goals advantage. 0.92 expected goals for. 0.01 expected goals against. And that equates out to a 98.72 expected goals for percentage. As dominant of a performance as we've seen from the GREEF line this season, I know they've had a couple of games where they have not, well, they've had an expected goals for percentage of 100, but that was a sensational effort from the GREEF line, and this team needed it. So all in all, a great win for the Wild. And, on the Tyson Jost front, it's going to take a little time for him to gel with those fourth line guys, but 4 out of 10 faceoffs, got on the ice with his teammates, looks to already be comfortable in the locker room, which is a huge plus. So a good first step for Jost as well. He will bear watching the rest of the season just to see kind of how he grows and develops, but the biggest objective for him last night was getting out on the ice and starting to build some of that familiarity with his line mates, at least at this point in the season. So job well done for Jost as well. Going to be fun to watch him here over the next couple of months. We saw some changes on the power play for the Minnesota Wild as well as the penalty kill. We'll talk about what worked and what didn't when we come back here on Locked on Wild. It is that time of year once again as college basketball's NCAA tournament is finally here. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, betonline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head over to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. Give your bracket the best chance to be perfect this season at BetOnline, where the game starts. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Make sure that your second listen of the day is the Locked on Fantasy Hockey. Their live deadline reaction show will get you all the on-ice fantasy and betting analysis you need from hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone, with appearances from our roster of local experts. Plus, catch our own live deadline reaction show at 2 o'clock Central Time for our immediate reaction to the Minnesota Wild's moves or lack thereof. Locked on Fantasy Hockey is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. So changes on special teams. We asked for it and we got it. And mixed results from both cases, I would say. In looking at the power play, first off, the Wild tried to replicate some of their 5-on-5 success by just going with line combinations. You know, they had the Hartman line with the top pairing on D, and they had the second unit out there with the second D line pairing. So just trying to replicate some of that success in the 5-on-5. But if we're looking at how to fix this power play, and it did get a power play goal courtesy of Kirill Kaprizov. If we're looking at how to try to fix this power play, it got to start by just getting organized with it. We're seeing way too many turnovers in the neutral zone. Had a couple of instances last night, couple of power plays in which the Bruins got more shots shorthanded than the Wild did with the extra attacker. You can't have that on a power play. And so for the Wilds, they have to get organized and just, I think, stop trying to do too much. I don't know if I would agree necessarily with pulling Joel Eriksson Ek off the power play, because he has far and away the most power play points on this team. So I don't know if I can super agree with that decision, but I get where they were going. If this team has had so much success in 5-on-5, try to kind of simplify it and just go with those 5-on-5 groups. And it, like I said, it did work for the first power play goal of the game, but after that, not really getting into the zone cleanly, turning the puck over in the neutral zone, leading to shorthanded opportunities. Power play is still a work in progress, and so I think you just have to continue to tweak that lineup and continue to preach. Just like we saw Dean Evison do it late in the game. Just calm down and just do your job. Now, penalty kill is a different story. For the Wilds, stylistically, they were way more aggressive and trying to deny teams clean entry into the zone, which has been a huge problem and has led to this penalty kill being as bad as it has been over the last several weeks. So that was good to see. They were being way more aggressive in just trying to attack the player that had the puck and prevent clean look opportunities. I think that's been one of the big issues for this team with their penalty kill, is that everybody just has kind of gotten pulled into the net, and that allows your opponent to just continue to kind of methodically work around the zone at will and look for those good opportunities and then capitalize on rebounds. If you are attacking the player who has the puck and preventing them from taking as much time as they want to make those decisions, that's what leads to bad passes. That's what leads to turning the puck over. And that's what leads to clearing the puck out of the offensive zone. So I thought the penalty kill looked way better. I know Marchand did have the power play goal, but as I said, in that instance, it was a situation of the Wilds kind of being caught in between with a couple of players still entering the zone, a couple of players kind of getting pulled back in front of the net, and a good screen in front of Talbot that just prevented him from seeing the puck. That's going to happen, and you got to just chalk it up to, that Boston team that the Wild beat last night is a very good team, and even if they were a little shorthanded last night, they're still fully capable of winning every time they're out on the ice. So they're going to make some plays throughout the course of the game, and that was certainly one of them. So, yes, the penalty kill was only 2 out of 3, but that's the percentage they've been at for the last few months anyway. So it's not that it's not that big of a deal. It looked better, and that is I think the important thing to keep in mind. So special teams may be trending in the right direction, although power play wise, I don't know if I would stick with those changes, but we'll wait and see. The deadline for the NHL trade deadline is Monday, and it sounds like the Jack McBain sweepstakes is starting to heat up even further. And so we will talk about the latest in the Jack McBain bidding war and how the Wild may get more than they are asking for currently. We'll do that. Plus, we'll look at some of the trades that have already happened throughout the NHL. All that to finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And again, just a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. So the trade deadline coming up on Monday, and for the Minnesota Wild, one of the things on their list of objectives before Monday's deadline seems to more and more be to trade the rights of Jack McBain to a team that he would be willing to sign with. Just seems at this point like the writing is pretty squarely on the wall that he is not going to sign here. And so makes sense. Get something for him and get him to a spot where he is more likely to sign. It's heating up, though, to where the Wild could very, very easily get way more than they are looking for in a trade package. And you've got a couple of teams that are bidding for the services of McBain. Elliot Friedman, in his 32 Thoughts, mentioning that, and Brett Marshall had this tweet once again, just kind of going over a few things. The Minnesota Wild kicked tires on the goalie market, but the acquisition price was too high. We'll talk about that in a second. Also noted, Montreal and Arizona could be fits for Jack McBain. Returns still as a second. Arizona has 5 of them. Says the Wild are looking for a defender with beef, and they like Dvorak, but not a fit right now. So if you take Arizona and Montreal, what is the thing that they both have in common? Not having great seasons, which means that those picks are going to be very high. If you can get from one of those two teams more than a second round pick, I don't know if this would enter into the first category. If it does, I mean, just tell me where to sign. I'll do it myself. Even if you get a second and, this becomes an immense win for the Minnesota Wild. A massive win for them. And it's just further capital that Judd Brackett has to work with in the NHL draft, which has worked out well since he was brought on to the team to oversee the draft. So if this gets into the territory where the Wild get a second and or a first, massive win for this team. Also, don't be surprised with some of the moves that we saw yesterday. Calle Järnkrok going to the Calgary Flames. He netted the Kraken a 2022 second-round pick, a 2022 third-round pick, and a 2024 seventh-round pick. The Florida Panthers sending Tyler Similak, a 2023 first-rounder, and a 2022 fourth-round pick for Ben Chiarot. And the New York Rangers acquiring Frank Vatrano and getting a 2022 fourth-round pick for his services. The prices for these trades, super high. So it doesn't surprise me that Bill Guerin kind of kicked the tires on a few things. And that's not to say that they won't make a move. There certainly is possibility that the Wild will find something to bring some assistance to this roster. And we will have, before Monday, we'll have a buyer's guide and a seller's guide to the trade deadline, in which we'll look at both approaches and we'll look at some possibilities for this team to consider and some of the assets that they could put on the table in a trade. So it's possible that they still end up making a move, but so those prices are, and they're only going to continue to look crazier. I mean, if you're getting even a 2022 first round pick for a fringe D-man, what are you going to get for Claude Giroux? What are the Flyers going to get for Claude Giroux? It's going to be an astronomical price. So as much as we would have liked, and recent play has certainly dictated this too, as much as we would have liked to see the Wild be in on Claude Giroux, it just doesn't make sense anymore for this team. And from a price point, you're probably having to give up Marco Rossi for one, and a first, and either the likes of a Kalen Addison or I don't know, another player that's close, because the Wild have so many guys who are in that fringe, like ready to play territory. Do you count them then as a prospect, or do you count them as the young player and then you have to give up a prospect in addition to that? I'm glad that the Wild are not going to be in on that, because the ask is going to be insane when we see what Giroux is going to go for, when we see what some of these other guys are going to go for. It's going to be way too high. So it will probably be a pretty quiet deadline for the Wild, with the exception of Jack McBain and maybe an acquisition, maybe one acquisition to try to help kind of beef things up. Beyond that, I don't really see much being done. So we'll keep an eye on it. If the Wild do make moves, of course, we'll be all over it, and we'll just have to see what direction they go when we get to 2:00 Central Time on Monday. That is going to wrap it up for today's episode of Locked On Wild. So now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure you head over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey for your second listen of the day. Hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. Locked On Fantasy Hockey is free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just like Locked On Wild, we are available anywhere you want to listen, we're available anytime you want to listen as well. So make sure to give us a follow, give us a subscribe on YouTube, and make sure to follow us on social media as well. The Locked On Madness tournament in full swing. And so check that out on Twitter at Locked On Wild to vote for your favorite Minnesota Wild players. We'll keep you up to date on all things trade deadline, all things Minnesota Wild, because if a trade, big news, or a puck drop anywhere in the state of hockey, Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.